Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to lecture 2 of Polity NCERT series. We launched this course yesterday when I told you that we shall discuss this textbook in political science for class 11th titled Indian Constitution at Work. And in 8 lectures, we will discuss and cover all the important chapters of this beautifully written NCERT book. Yesterday, we discussed Constitution, why and how. If you haven't watched that lecture yet, after this session, please go through that lecture so that there is continuity in this series. Today, we will discuss lecture number 2, where we will talk about chapter number 2 of this book, Rights in the Indian Constitution. But before we start, let me tell you something. In this chapter, NCERT focuses on the fundamental rights mentioned in the Constitution. And normally, when I take polity classes for our enrolled students for the Civil Services Exam, I cover fundamental rights in close to 25 hours. Clear? This lecture, this chapter, also deals with directive principles of state policy, for which I take another 7 hours, which means 32 hours. This chapter also deals with fundamental duties, which takes another 2 hours. This chapter also deals with amendment to the Constitution and one of the most important landmark cases in the history of independent India, Keshavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala, 1973. For which I consume another 3 hours. So what we are going to discuss today in the next 1 hour or so, if we have to understand all these topics holistically in great detail for the Civil Services Exam, it would take roughly 40 hours. Why am I telling you this? So that you are not misled that NCERTs alone will be sufficient to crack the Civil Services Exam. NCERT books are only to lay your foundation so that your basics are cleared. And once your basics are cleared, then you can follow the standard books, which can be D.D. Basu, which can be Lakshmikant, or should you wish to enroll in a coaching class, where all these important chapters or important concepts would be discussed in roughly 40 hours. NCERT books are only for basic conceptual clarity. That is why this chapter does not explain fundamental rights in great detail. It only gives you a slight idea about the rights that are mentioned in the Constitution. It does not deal with various Supreme Court judgments, because nowadays UPSC is asking you a question and also asking you that answer this question by citing relevant case laws. So case laws are very important. But obviously, since we are discussing only NCERTs, we are not discussing full-fledged polity in these lectures. We will also look at getting basic conceptual clarity from this lecture. But I wanted to flag this right at the start because you should not be misled into believing that NCERT books are sufficient to crack the Civil Services Exam. If that is clear, let's get started and let's look at the importance of rights. The first thing that this chapter talks about, Asian Games were to be held in Delhi in 1982, for which the government hired various contractors. These contractors hired poor workers from different parts of the country, and they were made to live in miserable conditions, inhuman conditions, and they were also not paid enough. Enough in the sense, they were paid less than the minimum wages. So minimum wages are to be set, below which you can't pay any worker. Even below that, these workers were paid because these workers were tasked of making flyovers or bridges or stadiums to get ready for the Asian Games in Delhi in 1982. One organization, People's Union for Democratic Rights, approached the Supreme Court and said, "My lord, this is begar, or this is exploitation, which means it violates the fundamental rights mentioned in the Constitution. because Article 23 prohibits exploitation. Article 23 prohibits traffic, begar, and other forms of forced labor. And what is this begar? If you are forced to work. What is this begar? If you are forced to work and no wages are provided to you. But the fact of the matter in this case was, these workers were not forced to work. They volunteered to work. They agreed that we will work, we will construct all these important requirements for the Asian Games, whether it is bridges, stadiums, flyovers. So they volunteered to work. They were not forced. So how is this begar? And they were also paid money. They were also paid wages, but just below the minimum wages. Although not mentioned here, Supreme Court said this comes under the term, under the phrase, other forms of forced labor. Because Article 23 prohibits traffic, begar, and other forms of forced labor. This practice comes under other forms of forced labor. So you have to provide minimum wages to these workers. This is the right available to an individual in India. Another instance cited here, a young man from Assam was accused of committing a crime for which he was arrested, and now he has to stand on a trial because you are innocent until proven otherwise. The executive, the prosecution has to prove before the court that you are guilty. But this person was not of mental strength, in a sense that he was found to be mentally unstable to stand on a trial, because a mentally unstable person cannot be convicted. Then what happened in this case? He was sent to a mental hospital for treatment. And then this hospital, but basically he was still in the custody. He was not a free person. He was in the custody, but not in a jail, but in a mental hospital. But there he had no liberty. He can't go out. He can't meet his family. Then this medical hospital wrote twice in 1967 and 1996 that now this person is fit for a trial because he has been treated successfully. But no one paid any attention. Then one statutory body, National Human Rights Commission, which was looking at the plight of under trials in Assam, because who is an under trial? If you're accused in a crime, but you have not been convicted, the case is going on, you are an under trial. NHRC was looking at the plight of these under trials in Assam and found this case of this man, and ultimately then the court ordered his release. But the fact of the matter is, for close to 54 years, he was under custody. And when he was released, he was 77 years of age. When Constitution gives us another right, which is right to life, right to liberty, right to roam around freely throughout the territory of India, this right was snatched from this individual. Because in order to implement this fundamental right better, there should be right to speedy trial. The cases cannot go on for long and long and long, immortalized by Sunny Deol where he says, Tariq pe Tariq pe Tariq. In this case, the court came to the rescue of these construction workers. But in this case, the court was unable. Which means we just don't only need rights, we also need these rights to be enforced. But for that you need to understand, although not mentioned in this book, what are rights? Rights are basically claims. And you can claim these rights from the state. What can you claim? That don't deprive me of my right to life and personal liberty. Don't discriminate against me. Don't deny me equality. Don't exploit me. Don't snatch my freedoms. Don't snatch my liberty. These are the rights that you can claim from the state. So what is a right? Right is basically a claim from the state, which you can claim from the state. And normally in democratic countries, a set of rights known as the Bill of Rights is mentioned in the Constitution itself. so that we can enforce these rights. In fact, during our freedom struggle as well, way back in 1928, a Motilal Nehru Committee report was set up, which demanded the British government that you should give us rights, way back in 1928. So if those who fought for our independence, they wanted and demanded rights from the British, the colonial government, and now that India was independent, we discussed yesterday the Constituent Assembly, which was set up to draft the Constitution of India. So when this Constituent Assembly was set up, there were no two opinions whether we should have these rights or not. These rights had to be given to the people. And these rights are now called fundamental. But why are these rights called fundamental? Multiple reasons. Reason number one is these rights are so important that without these rights, one cannot explore his or her potential. For example, there is a guest coming to your place or coming to your event, but this guest is a very respectable figure. What will you do with this guest? You will keep a seat for this guest at a prominent place at this event. If rights are so important, a prominent place should be given to these rights in the Constitution itself. And a prominent place has been given to these rights, where a separate part of the Constitution, Part 3 of the Constitution, mentions the entire list of fundamental rights. Because these fundamental rights are called fundamental because they have an important place in the Constitution. Constitution has listed them separately and made special provisions for its protection. Protection in the sense that the government cannot violate your fundamental rights. And Constitution itself provides for a remedy. In case the government violates your fundamental rights, what you can do? You can knock the doors of the court. You can directly approach the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court is considered to be the protector of your fundamental rights. Long story short, what are rights? Rights are claims. Something that you can claim from the state. And these rights are called fundamental because they have a separate place in the Constitution. Special provisions to protect these rights. Special provisions to provide for remedy in case these fundamental rights are violated. And if these fundamental rights are violated, you can directly knock the doors of the Supreme Court, which is the top court in this country, known as the apex court. Right to equality. Two instances are provided. Two friends, they visit a village and they go to a tea seller. The tea seller knows one individual, but not this friend of this person. And now this tea seller is asking this person, what is your name? So that this tea seller can know the caste of the friend of this person. And when he comes to know that he is a Dalit, he gives tea in a mug to this, in a nice mug to this person who is from the upper caste, and gives tea in an earthen cup to this Dalit. Do you think any right has been violated here? Isn't this discrimination on the grounds of caste? Yes, it is. Instance number 2. An order is served to 4 newsreaders of a television channel. There is a television channel. 4 newsreaders have been served an order that from now onwards, you cannot read news on screen. Why? Not because you are women, but because you are above 45 years. But they happen to be women. This order did not apply to men who had crossed 45 years. So which means this television channel is doing what? It is discriminating against you on the basis of sex. Although not mentioned in this NCERT, but we can say fundamental rights would be violated in this case number 2 if this television channel was a state television channel. because you can get and enforce fundamental rights from the state, claim fundamental rights from the state, because fundamental rights are enforceable against the state. If the state is violating your fundamental rights, you can drag the state to the court. And state here would mean the government of India, the government of a state, legislature of the center, legislature of a state, panchayati raj institutions, urban local bodies, so on and so forth. But to prevent such situations, because even NCERT says these are imaginary situations, but to prevent these situations, this tells us the importance of rights. Constitution should make provisions, should provide for rights so that such situations do not occur. And we have 6 sets of fundamental rights available in the Constitution. Right to equality, which deals with Articles 14 to 18. Right to freedom, which deals with Articles 19 to 22. Right against exploitation under Article 23 and 24. Right to religious freedom, Article 25 to 28. Cultural and educational rights under Article 29 and 30. Right to constitutional remedy under Article 32 of the Constitution. Although NCERT has not explained all these fundamental rights to a greater depth, but for basic conceptual clarity, let's discuss and understand what is mentioned in this book. It talks about right to equality. That means if there are public places, such as shops, such as hotels, such as places of entertainment, such as places of worship, there should be no discrimination. There should be equality. All the people should be given access, regardless of their religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth. That is right to equality. Within right to equality, untouchability, which is argued came into practice after the later Vedic period, where people of Dalit community were discriminated on the basis of their caste. That form of untouchability, Constitution says, has been abolished, and its practice in any form is forbidden. To have equality in the society, Constitution also says as a right that we will not award titles to anybody. Titles which used to be awarded by the British during the colonial period were just for your loyalty, not because of your contribution, not because of your talent, not because of your scientific contributions, but because of your loyalty to the British Empire. You were given knighthood, Sir, Rai Bahadur. These titles create classes in the society, and classes by its very nature is against the practice of equality. And that is why Constitution says these titles will not be awarded. But titles will still be awarded if it is for your academic credentials, if it is for your academic excellence, if it is for your military contribution. Academic and military titles can be awarded. For example, Chief of Army Staff, Doctor, Engineer, Professor. Such titles can be awarded because these titles are given for your accomplishment, not for your loyalty. That is right to equality. But you might say, sir, if there is no discrimination on the grounds of caste, if everybody is to be treated equally by the Constitution, if that is what right to equality is, why are there special schemes for women and children? Why is there reservation in educational institutions and government jobs for people belonging to socially and educationally backward classes of citizens? That's because Constitution clarifies that although we will have equality, but there were some people who are never equal. For example, women, which require extra protection. For example, children who need extra protection, extra care. For example, those who have been discriminated against, tribals, Dalits. And for them, there will be reservation in government jobs, in educational institutions. That would not be violation of equality, because that's a special protection available to them, because they were never deemed equal. That's right to equality. Then NCERT shifts its focus on right to freedom and says equality and freedom or liberty, these are two important rights, and they are most essential to a democracy. Freedom means liberty of thought. Say whatever you want to say, express whatever you want to express, make a movie, write a song, write a book. Whatever creative expressions you want to make, that is your right. And you cannot be denied right to life and liberty. You cannot be randomly or what we say arbitrarily arrested. If you are to be arrested, then you have to follow, the state has to follow procedure established by law. Although here we had to discuss what is procedure established by law, what is due process of law, but that's beyond the scope of NCERT right now. Let's just focus on the basics. And what is that law? Nobody can be arrested without being informed of grounds on which you are arrested. If I am not aware on what grounds am I being arrested, how can I call my lawyer so that he can get me released from the jail? That is why I should be told what are the grounds on the basis of which you are being arrested. Is it for murder? Is it for terrorism? Is it for cheating? Whatever it is, but tell me the grounds on the basis of which I am being arrested so that I can set up my legal defense. And once I am arrested, I have to be produced within 24 hours of my arrest before the nearest magistrate, before the nearest judge, so that there is a check on the power of the police. If the police has arbitrarily arrested you or not, the judge has to satisfy himself or herself whether this arrest is justified or not. If it is not justified, I will be released. If it is justified, I will remain in the jail. These protections have to be mentioned in the Constitution. Otherwise, we will be a police state where police can randomly arrest somebody without telling that person on what grounds are you being arrested, on what charges are you being arrested. But then there is something called preventive detention. Preventive detention in the sense, normally you are arrested after you have committed a crime. You are arrested after you are accused of committing a crime. But sometimes the police may anticipate that you might commit a crime. So to prevent you from committing the crime, you are being arrested. That is what we call preventive detention. For example, if we know that if this leader, whether trade union leader or a political leader or a spiritual religious leader or a caste leader is allowed to organize this rally, there may be violation of peace. There may be disturbance of law and order. Maybe stones will be pelted, buses will be burned, property will be destroyed. So should we wait for the city to be burnt, or should we prevent the city from getting burnt? So should we take an action after these followers of this particular leader have burned down the city? Or should we prevent the city from getting burned? For that, let's arrest this individual. He has not committed any crime, but we anticipate that he might commit a crime because of his speeches, inflammatory speeches. There will be breakdown of law and order. Let's prevent this person from committing this crime, and that's what we call preventive detention. NCERT says on the face of it, it looks like an effective tool at the hands of the government to deal with anti-social elements. But NCERT itself says that this provision has often been misused, overused, abused, hyperused by the government. Preventive detention. But when we look at freedom, right to freedom, it's not that all these rights are absolute. And what do we mean by the absolute nature of these rights? For example, if in a right to freedom, Constitution has given you the right to say whatever you want to say, express whatever you want to express. That does not mean this right is absolute, that you can do anything that you want to do. You can say whatever you want to say. There are restrictions imposed on your fundamental rights, on your freedoms. NCERT mentions 3 such restrictions on your freedom of speech and expression. For example, your freedom of speech and expression can be restricted on the grounds of public order, peace, morality. Although this term, peace, is not mentioned in the Constitution. Freedom of speech and expression comes under Article 19, 1A of the Constitution, but it can be restricted under Article 19, Clause 2 of the Constitution. On what grounds? There are 8 reasonable restrictions imposed on your fundamental rights. Restriction is in the interest of the sovereignty and integrity of India, in the interest of the security of the state, in the interest of friendly relations with foreign states, public order, morality or decency, contempt of court, defamation, incitement to an offence. Sir, can you explain one? For example, if I have the fundamental right to say whatever I have to say, and you and me, along with 300 other people, we are watching a movie at a multiplex, and suddenly I'm having some thoughts in my mind, mischievous thoughts, and I cry, fire, fire, fire. What will others think? Assume that there is a fire at the multiplex. And now there will be stampede. People will be rushing towards the exit, and in the process, some people may also unfortunately die. Police may come to me. Gentlemen, you are under arrest. I would say, why? Because you cried fire, 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 and there is no fire. It led to violation of public order. It led to a stampede. Some people have died. Many others have been injured. I cannot claim and say, I have the fundamental right to say whatever I have to say. I thought I will cry fire, fire, fire. That's my freedom. No, it comes with responsibility. So in the interest of public order, your fundamental right can be restricted. So there are 8 grounds on the basis of which your fundamental rights can be restricted. And peace is not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. But can there be further restrictions on these fundamental rights? For example, one member of the Constituent Assembly, Sarmad Mehraj Sir, look at the interesting speech that he gave at the Constituent Assembly. On one hand, Constitution is giving you the right, freedom of speech and expression, freedom to assemble peacefully without arms, freedom to reside and settle anywhere within the territory of India, freedom to move freely throughout the territory of India. On one hand, the Constitution is giving you the rights, and on the other hand, Constitution is imposing restrictions on your fundamental rights. It's like your employer is giving you the salary, but once the salary is handed over to you, on the other side, the salary is snatched from you. These are the contributions that you have to make for various funds. So at the end, you are left with peanuts. Mr. Sarmad Mehraj Sir asks, I feel that many of these fundamental rights have been framed from the point of view of a police constable. You will find that very minimum rights have been conceded and almost invariably followed by a proviso. Almost every article is followed by a proviso, which takes away the rights almost completely. Freedom of speech and expression, but restriction. Freedom to say whatever you want to say, but restriction. What should be our conception of fundamental rights? We want to incorporate every one of those rights which our people want to get, says Mr. Sarmad Mehraj Sir. That does not mean that fundamental rights are available only for those who are not accused of any crimes. there are fundamental rights available for the accused as well. If you are accused of a particular crime and then you have been convicted, you cannot be prosecuted for the same offense more than once. Which means if I have killed somebody and the court sent me to 14 years in jail, I stayed in jail in prison for 14 years. After that sentence is over, I come out of the jail and the police party is waiting for me. My dear, you are under arrest. Why? Because of the murder that you committed. But for that, I was serving 14 years in jail. I have already served my time in the jail. How can you arrest me again? That is something that Constitution does not allow. Because no person would be punished for the same offense more than once. There can be a mischievous question on your mind. Sir, if I commit theft once, for which I will be sent to jail, let's say for 2 years, does that mean after I am out of the jail after 2 years, now I can commit theft after theft and nobody can arrest me? Because I cannot be convicted for the same offense more than once. If once I have been convicted for theft, now I am like a free man committing theft after theft. No, every act of theft is a different offense. So if you robbed me, that is an offense. Now if you rob someone else, that is another offense for which you will be prosecuted. Constitution further says, no law shall declare any action as illegal from a back date. Although it should have been more clear. If, for example, there is a civil law, for example, taxes are to be imposed on you, Parliament, legislature can give it a retrospective effect. That means the Parliament may say that this tax liability is on you from the date 1st January 2010. So this tax imposition or this civil law can have retrospective effect, can effect from a back date. But criminal law will only have a prospective effect. You cannot give a retrospective effect to a criminal law. Sir, what does that mean? Teaching on YouTube the civil services aspirants, is this a crime today? It's not. That's why I'm teaching. If tomorrow Parliament enacts a law and says teaching on Unacademy IAS English YouTube channel is a crime, I will stop teaching. Clear? Because who wants to go to the jail? But this law will come into effect afterwards. That means today you have passed the law. Now it can come into effect. That means now if I start teaching on this channel, I can be arrested. But today this is not a crime. Can in 2026 Parliament enact a law and say whoever teaches on Unacademy IAS English YouTube channel is a crime? And say this law will come into effect from the 18th of September 2024, which is today. Right now it's not a crime. Can you make it a crime afterwards? That to give it a backdate enforcement? No, that's something that you can't do. Because if I was aware that it is a crime, I won't do it. And no person shall be asked to give evidence against himself. If this provision was not there in the Constitution, every case would have been solved by the police. There is a rape case, there is a murder case, there is a dacoity case, there is a terrorism case, but some of the cases, they don't end well. End well in the sense, there is no closure. In the sense, we don't know who committed this crime. We don't know who murdered Arushi Talwar, whether her parents or someone else. So there are some cases which you are unable to solve. But what if this provision was not there in the Constitution? What would have happened? All cases would have been solved. How? The police would have arrested me. You are under arrest. Why? Because you murdered Arushi Talwar. Said, I was not there in Noida. No, you were there. Confess that you have committed this crime. How can I confess? I have not committed this crime. They will beat me to pulp. Torture me inside the jail. And to save myself from this torture, what I will say? Okay, I confess that I have committed this crime. Now I will be taken to the judge. Judge Sahab, he has confessed that he has committed this crime. Okay, now that you have confessed, you are guilty, you are hanged, you are to be hanged by your neck till death. But that is something not allowed, because no person will be forced to give evidence against himself. That's the right mentioned in the Constitution. So one is right to equality, then there is right to freedom, then there is right against exploitation. And who are being exploited? Women, children. Isn't slavery exploitation, where I take you as a slave and you have to work for me? That is exploitation and prohibited by the Constitution. Although explicitly slavery is not mentioned, but we say, Constitution says, all forms of exploitation, such as traffic, such as begar, other forms of forced labor, is prohibited. We have also prohibited employment of children below the 14 years of age in dangerous occupations and processes, such as you can't employ a child less than the age of 14 in factories or mines, because their lives would be in danger. So you can't force child labor. And what is shown in this pic, name the fundamental right whose violation is depicted in this photograph. Child labor, it is prohibited. Then, right to freedom of religion. Religion is an emotional issue, and Constitution has allowed every single individual to freely profess your religion, practice your religion, propagate your religion. And this freedom is considered as a hallmark of democracy, because historically, if there was a ruler who belonged to a particular faith, the subjects were not allowed to practice their own religion if their religion was different from the religion of the ruler. Either they had to convert to the religion of the ruler, or they could not practice their rites. But that doesn't happen in a democratic country such as India, where every single individual will have the fundamental right to practice your religion, propagate your religion. But here also state can interfere. State can interfere to ensure that even while you are practicing your religion, there is no discrimination. Does that mean you can practice your religion and you cannot allow Dalits entry inside the temples? So social reform is at the heart of these religious rights. And it is this. For example, in the past, the government has taken steps. Although it was during the colonial government that sati was banned, human sacrifice was banned, because in the name of religion, you can't sacrifice humans and you can't claim that it is part of your religion. But now listen to me carefully. Freedom of religion has become a matter of political controversy as well. Because if I have the freedom to practice my religion, to propagate my religion, does that give me the fundamental right to convert you into my religion? Religious conversion in India has attracted a lot of attention. You can convert others into your religion, but not through inducement, not through bribe, not through force. You can communicate, you can tell, you can propagate your religion. You can spread information about your religion, and through that information you can attract others to your religion. But you can't forcefully convert others into your religion through bribe, through inducement, through threat, through coercion. That's something which Constitution does not allow. And this NCERT books talks about equality of all religions. When the country was partitioned, Pakistan became an Islamic state and declared Islam as the state religion in Pakistan. Then Pakistan was further split and Bangladesh also got liberated. They also claimed that they are an Islamic state. In Sri Lanka, there is one form of Buddhism which is a state religion. In Myanmar, there is a Buddhism which is part of the state religion. But in India, there is no state religion. All religions are given equality. We don't have to belong to a particular religion in order to become the Prime Minister or President or a judge or to hold government office. So that is what we call equality of all religions. There is no discrimination on the basis of religion. Even if there are government institutions, government educational institutions, government universities, they cannot promote a religion. They cannot impart religious instruction. And that is done to uphold, sustain, nurture the principle of secularism, where state is separate, religion is separate. Religion cannot influence the state, state cannot influence the religion. So one set of right, as we discussed, was right to equality. Then we discussed right to freedom, then right against exploitation, then right to freedom of religion. Now comes cultural and educational rights. What are these cultural and educational rights? India is not a homogeneous society. There are people who speak different languages. There are people who belong to different cultures. There are people who belong to different tribes. And every citizen of India, residing anywhere within the territory of India, if you have a distinct language, script, or culture of your own, and you want to preserve that culture, that's your fundamental right. And that is why within this fundamental right, minorities are given extra protection. But who are these minorities? Minorities, whether based on language, minorities, whether based on religion. And all these minorities, they can set up educational institutions of their choice. Whether you want to set up a law university, a medical college, an engineering college, a humanities college, that is your right. And in fact, this right is such that I told you previously, there is reservation for SCs, STs, OBCs. There is reservation for socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. But there is no reservation in these minority educational institutions. Because the land of India is the land of diversity. And within that diversity, we have religious minority, we have linguistic minority. They are empowered, allowed to establish educational institutions of their choice. These are the fundamental rights. But now the point is, what if Constitution would have given only these fundamental rights without telling us a remedy? How these fundamental rights will be enforced if the state is violating your fundamental rights, snatching your fundamental rights, depriving you of your fundamental rights? Sir, can you be more specific? If these rights are given, rights are mentioned on a piece of paper in our Constitution. I am reading right to equality, right to freedom, right against exploitation, right to religious freedom, cultural and educational rights. But what if the state is snatching these rights one by one? What should I do? Where do I go? The remedy itself is a fundamental right. And that remedy is right to constitutional remedy. As I told you at the start, you can directly approach the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will protect your fundamental rights. How? By issuing various writs, by issuing various directives. What are these directives? For example, habeas corpus, which means the court orders that the arrested person should be presented before it. It can also order to set a person free if you were wrongly arrested, arbitrarily arrested, illegally arrested. I have freedom, I have right to life and liberty. The police came and arrested me. Why? Because you are teaching students live. That too, chapter 2 of a textbook in political science for class 11th. Because your education would be affected, you will approach the Supreme Court. My lord, our teacher has been wrongly arrested. By whom? Sir, by the police. the court will issue the writ, the directive of habeas corpus. Bring that teacher to us so that we can see whether he was rightly arrested or arbitrarily arrested. The court will ask the police, why have you arrested this person? Sir, because he was teaching polity NCERT chapter 2 for free. What illogical is this? You are set free. Habeas corpus. Mandamus. A public official is not performing his duty, thereby violating your fundamental right. And what is that public duty? Next to your house, there is a heap of garbage which is not cleaned by the municipal authorities, because that's their job, to keep the city clean. You approach the municipal authorities, please clean this garbage. They say no, tomorrow, day after, and that day never comes. Not a Metallica song. The day that never comes. You approach the court. My lord, my right has been violated. Which right? Right to clean environment. Because the courts have interpreted right to life in such a manner, saying life does not only mean physical act of breathing. You can breathe and that satisfies right to life. Right to life means right to live with dignity. Right to life means right to education. Right to life means right to shelter. Right to life means right to livelihood. Right to life means right to privacy. Right to life means right to clean environment. Right to life means right against adverse effects of climate change, which recently Supreme Court said is also a fundamental right. But then the court will issue a directive, mandamus. We command this public body, you clean this garbage because you are violating the rights of my citizen. Enforcement of fundamental rights. Remedy if fundamental rights are violated. Prohibition. There is a case against you, and the case is you should be dismissed from IAS. God forbid, if you believe in God, this is just a hypothetical example, whether you should be dismissed from IAS or not. Why? Because you have indulged in corruption. Clear? So that's the case that is to be decided, and for that there is a body called CAT. There is a tribunal called CAT where your case will come up, Central Administrative Tribunal. But CAT goes a step further. And apart from deciding whether you should be dismissed from the service or not, it also looks at your personal life. It also looks at the amount of property that you have. It also looks at other aspects of your life which is beyond its jurisdiction. You just see whether I have indulged, I have not done my job properly, I am not mentally sane. That means I should be removed from the service. Just focus on that. Why are you intruding into my personal life? You will approach the Supreme Court. My lord, please prohibit this judicial body. Please prohibit this lower judicial body from proceeding further, because they have done something which is beyond its jurisdiction. They have considered a case which is beyond its jurisdiction, and the court will issue the writ of prohibition, saying we prohibit you. You can't proceed further. Then there is something called certiorari. In this case, what will happen? The court will order a lower court that you transfer this matter which is pending before you to a higher authority, because you seem to have violated the rights. Sir, can you give an example? For example, the court is hearing, the district court is hearing your case where you are accused of committing murder, for example. One of the golden rules of principles of natural justice is nobody should be sentenced without being heard. That means if you are accused in this case, your lawyer should present his arguments before the court. The prosecution should also present its arguments before the court. What if this district court is only hearing the government lawyer, not you? Which primarily means that your rights have been violated. You are not being heard. And this district court, even without hearing you, has said that you are guilty. You go to the court. My lord, you go to the Supreme Court because your fundamental right has been violated. My lord, I was not heard when this district court gave an order, gave this judgment. The court says, don't worry, we have heard your case, you're right, you have proven it. We are directing this district court to transfer this case to a higher authority because you have violated the fundamental rights. Then the last one is quo warranto. If tomorrow you are given the position of an IAS, but you did not write the exam, or you are not even a graduate, or you are below the age of 21, or you are above the age of 40, or above the age of 32 if you are from general category, which means you are not qualified to occupy that post, yet you are occupying that post. If I approach the Supreme Court and say, my lord, this person is not qualified to hold this post, the court will issue the writ of quo warranto and ultimately you will be removed from your office forthwith. But sir, I did not understand. Why should you approach the court? If I was given IAS, what is your problem? It violates fundamental right under Article 16. Equality of opportunity in public employment. Every single citizen should have the equal opportunity of getting a government job. And that is why the court will issue quo warranto and remove you from your service forthwith. Judiciary plays a very important role in protecting all these fundamental rights. This was our discussion on the rights that are mentioned in the Constitution. And as I told you, this was not a holistic discussion on fundamental rights because normally that would take 25 hours. But this was just to set the basics right so that now you can read Lakshmikant or D.D. Basu and maybe you will be in a better position to understand. After fundamental rights, this chapter also deals with directive principles of state policy. There is something called justiciable and non-justiciable. What is justiciable and non-justiciable? If your fundamental rights are violated, what will you do? You will approach the court. What the court will do? Will issue order to protect, enforce your fundamental rights, which means fundamental rights are enforceable, which means fundamental rights are justiciable, which means fundamental rights are enforceable in a court of law. But then there is an unenforceable part in the Constitution called directive principle of state policy, where if these directive principles are not implemented, you cannot approach the court. But sir, then by what logic? Why should we have these directive principles? Listen to me carefully. Article 37 talks about two important characteristics of directive principles. And the very objective of directive principle is to establish a welfare state. Welfare state in the sense, all the resources that we have, material resources, for example land, it should be so distributed so that it leads to larger public good. Economic system that we have, it should not result in the concentration of wealth in fewer hands. Rich are becoming richer, poor are remaining poorer. No, that should not happen. The idea is the development, the socio-economic development of the entire population of India, which means we should provide for equal pay for equal work. We should take steps, the government should take steps so that the living standard of the people increases. The government should take steps so that rich and poor, this gulf should be minimized. The government should take steps so that Panchayati Raj institutions are established. The government should take steps so that we enact a uniform civil code. the government should take steps so that executive and judiciary are separated from each other. All these are non-enforceable part of the Constitution under directive principles. Article 37 says these directive principles are not enforceable in a court of law. But Article 37 also says, nevertheless, these directive principles are fundamental for the governance of the country. It shall be the duty of the state to implement these directive principles of state policy. But why were these DPSPs not made enforceable? Because the state needs time and resources. Time and resources in the sense, if we have to implement, for example, Uniform Civil Code, which some of you may be aware of, because different religious communities are governed differently when it comes to their personal laws. For example, laws related to marriage, divorce, inheritance, adoption. Hindus are governed differently, Muslims step separately, Christians separately, Parsis separately. Constitution envisaged under DPSP that we should have a uniform civil code so that there is one common law which will be applicable to all the religious communities, regardless of their religion, when it comes to marriage, divorce, inheritance, adoption. But in 1947, India witnessed partition along the lines of religion. In 1950, this constitution was given. State should have been given time to implement Uniform Civil Code because we have just come out of the partition of this country on religious grounds. So if we have to implement Uniform Civil Code, for that there should be dialogue, discussion with the people from different religious communities. Without consensus, we cannot implement this. That is why we say these DPSPs, they are not inferior to fundamental rights. But to implement DPSPs, the state needs time. Similarly, raising the standard of living, it requires money. Providing adequate jobs, livelihood opportunities, it requires money. Giving a right to work, it requires money to implement. And since we came out of colonialism, it is argued that when Aurangzeb died, close to 25% of the world trade was contributed by India. Some would also say that India's GDP was 25% of the world. But then, this Sone ki Chidiya, as India was called, this golden sparrow, British came to exploit the resources from India. And when British left, India was one of the most impoverished countries of the world. So we lacked money, we lacked resources. So we needed money and resources to implement these directive principles. That is why these directive principles are not enforceable in a court of law. Not because they are inferior, but because the state needs time and resources to implement them. But if these directive principles are fundamental for the governance of the country, and it shall be the duty of the state to implement them, what is then the relationship between fundamental rights and directive principles? If, for example, I told you material resources that we have, land, it should be so distributed so as to subserve the common good, so that it leads to larger good for the larger sections of the society. That's when zamindari was to be abolished. Zamindari system was to be abolished. Land reforms were to be implemented. Because these zamindars would own massive acres of land. But the government decided that we should abolish zamindari system and distribute this land amongst those who are landless, among the landless workers. But it came in conflict with fundamental right to property, because right to property at that time was a fundamental right. And I told you fundamental rights cannot be snatched, cannot be violated. But over a period of time, something happened, although not mentioned in NCERT, but 9th schedule was inserted into the constitution, which said any law placed in 9th schedule, judiciary cannot question the validity of that law. Because if your fundamental rights are violated, where will you go? You will go to the court. So if your right to property has been snatched, the right to property of the zamindar has been snatched, and this land is given and distributed amongst the landless workers. If this zamindar would go to the court, but 9th schedule says such a law cannot be challenged in a court of law. The court does not have the power to review the validity of this law, the constitutional validity of this law. It was through this route of 9th schedule that zamindari was abolished. Land reforms were implemented in India. But at the same time, in a landmark case in 1973, the Supreme Court held that there are certain basic features of the Constitution, and those basic features cannot be amended. And the court has previously also held that right to property is not a basic feature of Indian Constitution. What does that mean? The fundamental question before Keshavananda Bharati case was whether Parliament has the unrestricted power to amend any provision of the Constitution. The court said, yes, Parliament can amend any provision of the Constitution, but not the basic structure of the Constitution. If there are some provisions which are part of the basic structure, for example, parliamentary democracy, rule of law, Article 21, right to life and personal liberty, independence of judiciary, these are the things that no constitutional amendment can violate. And if you want to know in detail what this Keshavananda Bharati case is all about, you can search this Keshavananda Bharati case on our YouTube channel. I have made a full detailed video lecture on Keshavananda Bharati and the doctrine of basic structure. Please watch that video lecture after this session and you will get full idea about what this case was all about. But lastly, I told you that fundamental duties is also something which is touched upon by this NCERT chapter. These fundamental duties were not originally part of the Constitution. These fundamental duties were added to the Constitution by the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, 1976. Srimati Indira Gandhi then was the Prime Minister. She was asked what is the need to add fundamental duties to the Constitution. She said, people are more aware of their rights. I want to make them aware of their duties. And what are these duties? We must abide by the Constitution. We must defend the country. We must promote the harmony amongst all citizens. We must protect the environment. But these are not legal duties. Legal duties in the sense, even if you don't follow it, the Constitution does not prescribe what is the punishment that you will get if you do not follow these fundamental duties. One important line. It must be noted that our Constitution does not make the enjoyment of rights dependent or conditional upon fulfillment of duties. Only if you will fulfill these duties, then you can enjoy these rights. No, Constitution does not talk about this. In a sense, that by including these fundamental duties, the status of fundamental rights have not changed in the Constitution. Originally, there were 10 fundamental duties, but now there are 11 fundamental duties that are mentioned in the Constitution. Because the 11th one was added by the 86th Constitutional Amendment Act. The year was 2002. And for the Civil Services examination, you should also remember and memorize all these 11 fundamental duties. But that is not mentioned in NCERT. For that, you will have to go to either D.D. Basu or Lakshmikant, or attend my plus classes where we will discuss all these things in great detail. This was Chapter 2 of NCERT textbook in political science titled Indian Constitution at Work, and we discussed rights in the Indian Constitution. And I will reiterate and repeat, we did not discuss it according to the requirements of this exam, because the requirement is much higher. We have to discuss lots and lots of cases, lots and lots of judgments, lots and lots of concepts. But NCERT is a stepping stone which will build your conceptual clarity, so that then you can read, understand class lectures or their reference books such as Lakshmikant or D.D. Basu. But again, I will tell you, if you are our enrolled student, something that I get queries on my Telegram channel, you don't have to read these NCERT books, because I will cover them in my lectures holistically. But if you're preparing on your own, start with NCERTs. Maybe you can attend these sessions, so that then you can understand Lakshmikant, D.D. Basu, Subhash Kashyap in great detail. And then again, my dear, Lakshmikant also is not sufficient. Lakshmikant can help you in prelims. For mains, you need Lakshmikant plus newspaper, Lakshmikant plus current affairs. And that combination, that combo of Lakshmikant and current affairs will help you in the mains examination. Should you wish to get the PDF of this lecture, that will be available on my Telegram channel. The link is provided in the description. That is it for today. See you again tomorrow, 6 o'clock in the evening, with chapter 3 of this NCERT book. Till then, have a great time. All the best. Bye-bye. Take care.